who turns up late.
Okay, so
Great.
now we are recording, so I'm going to start. Well, most people of this session know me. I'm Anibal Sanchez. It's a great opportunity to be here sharing with you my experiences using Visual Studio Code with Joomla and PHP. The idea of this talk is going to be for the students of the Google Summer of Code. I'm wearing the t-shirt of the last time I was a mentor. Right now I'm not a mentor, but I'm happy to be collaborating with the program. So now we are going to start with, let me share the screen. Are you watching my Visual Studio Code?
Yes, that's lovely. It's coming through great.
Right. The idea is that Visual Studio Code is an amazing editor, but it's also a tool that is going beyond what is an editor, because it is a gate to an online community, because there's so many extensions and possibilities for the tool that you can do anything that you want. Most of the time I'm working with Visual Studio Code, even we are not developing for PHP or for Joomla. You can document and do anything. For example, I'm taking the notes of this session in a markdown file. Here you can check how the file is previewed, and all of this within the editor. Also, there are so many extensions that it is not only a tool for PHP. You can do anything that you want with Visual Studio Code, because there are so many ways to extend it. For example, to start, this is my Visual Studio Code. This is not a standard setting. I'm going to show you how, for example, it looks like when I reset the settings to the basics. And this is how it looks when you reset everything. But for this session, I have customized it in this way. And this is part of my personal settings. And other particularities of the editor is that everything is a command. So you can customize all the editor and define, for example, shortcuts to access everything. So for students, I think that the first task that they have to do is to explore how they can access the functionality of the Visual Studio Code with shortcuts, because we are not really using the menu, the function for the menu. I rarely use the menu or these shortcuts on the side. Most of the time they are hidden. I don't use them. This is mainly because, for example, if I'm a student, I would like to access, let me show you this PHP, this PDF, where you can check the shortcuts. For example, one of the main features or main functions of the editor is the command palette. When you are always checking the command palette and trying to access the commands. And for example, when I navigate from all these views, I always trying to access them with the commands to navigate this area of the editor, but without clicking on them. Most of the time, you are always accessing the views and exploring navigating these functions with keys. So the first task for the students is to explore all of these commands. So you have commands to navigate between the views. You have commands to do the basic edition, and there are so many ways to use the editor. So the first exercise for the students is to explore all of these commands. So, for example, what we can do here is I already show you the settings. This is my settings, and you can also use the settings with the JSON structure. So most of the time you don't use this dialog to configure the editors and explore the possibilities. Most of the time you are always trying to customize the editor here in the JSON structure. If you have any question, please ask me, because I can be talking about Visual Studio Code for hours. Okay? Okay, I'm going to continue. So to start, we can do the simple task of editing. Let me try. I prepare something here.
Anibal,
yeah.
Probably could you go through your add-ons? That would be interesting. Probably what you recommend.
Yeah, the add-on, the extensions. I have updated the documentation chapter about Visual Studio Code. And here I detailed all my installed extensions. The idea is that we have extension for PHP. That's the main area that we extend for Joomla. There are also many extensions to control Git, the repository. For example, in particular, there's one interesting one that is this GitHub integration for pull requests and issues. So you don't have to navigate to the browser to access GitHub. You can do it right in the editor. There are also a couple of extensions for Joomla. That I created one of them, and the other was created by Roberto. There are also what Philip asked about extension to access remotely to websites, or live share your developing your session with other people, so you can do pair programming or code on the same file.
So can you share this link, please?
Yes. You want the documentation chapter?
Thanks a lot.
And there's also recommended extension that can do, for example, there's one handy extension that changes the case of the variables. So, for example, here you can change easily from here to this kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm going to start with the basics about PHP. For example, in this project, I have created a simple file with a line. And here you can access the line and execute PHP. And what is most interesting for the students is that you can configure the debugger. This is the debugger configuration for Visual Studio Code. And if you click here, you are defining a breakpoint. And this is the configuration for the breakpoints. You can break on notices, warning, errors, exception, on everything. If I click F5, it does nothing because the environment is not configured. So you have to create the configuration for PHP. It automatically creates two profiles, one for listen for a session, and the other is to debugging the file that I have opened. So I'm going to change my port because I always change the Xdebug port. And when I press F5, it starts debugging. But right now it's debugging and listening for a session. I'm going to change it to debug the current script. And now it is debugging. So when you debug, you can explore the local variables, superglobals, other constant, or other watches. And for a student, this is the first step to properly configure PHP and run it debugging and to create a script. Now we can try to debug a website in a container. For example, to run containers, I use Lando. Lando is one of my favorite tools to create Docker configurations because it is easy to create a profile for Joomla, for example. This is the link to my recipes for Joomla. This is the same configuration that I have customized here for this project and for Joomla 4. With this configuration, for example, I already have the proper JSON structure for the debugger, so I can easily copy-paste this configuration into the Visual Studio configuration and delete it from here. In that recipe for Lando and Docker, I have several common scripts for example, restoring Akira backups or configure the PHP. And this is the configuration, for example, that I mentioned before about Xdebug and how I configure the port for Xdebug. In some cases, I have to use the previous version of Xdebug, so I can easily change from one configuration to the other. In this case, I am running here let me turn off everything. I'm going to start the container again.
Anibal,
Yeah.
not being a big user of debugger, why would you have two different versions of the debugger? Why wouldn't you just use the latest version?
Because sometimes when you create, for example, other environments with PHP, I don't know, I try to reproduce the same versions that you use in production. So sometimes when you create the profile in Lando, they download a container that has a pre-version of Xdebug. So sometimes I have to change the profile from one Xdebug. The perfect world, I always try to use the latest version, but sometimes we need to use the previous version.
Okay.
If I can add to that, if you're running PHP 5.6, I know you shouldn't, but if you do, then you can't run Xdebug 3.0.
Yeah. So this is the container that I am running with Joomla 4. For example, if I try this is the other version, I want to close this window and want to open this one. So here, for example, if I in the main index file of Joomla 4, if I put a breakpoint here, I start the session and open the home. Of course, it's not going to work, no? Of course. We are in public, so it's going to embarrass me. Why it's not working? I know what happened before, and that's it. So you can do step-by-step debugging. You can debug variables, break on exceptions, and everything else. What else? Here I have this is the explorer of the files that we are already visited. This is a powerful search and replace that the studio have. This site does not integration with Git, but this is the area where you can explore the integration with the repository, debugging. What else? Remote. What Philip asked about remote access to other directories. So here we have first this the list of extensions that we can install. These are my installed extensions. There are so many extensions that I have here that I don't know. I use different profiles for each project, and you can customize the extensions that are activated for each project. You can have profiles. You can also have profiles. What else? These are my installed extension for PHP. They are mainly what I have already documented here in the documentation. And there are also many more extensions, for example, for JavaScript or for TypeScript. Markdown also has several interesting extensions to customize the styling of the Markdown files or to other shortcuts. Any question? No.
I've got one. Is there any way to benchmark code? So, for example, is there any, apart from putting timestamps, is there any way that there's any extensions that would help? So, for example, if you were to choose two different functions in PHP, you could actually code one, run the code, see how quick it was, and then change to the other, run it, and see how quick it was.
Yeah, the idea, the difference with, because I think that you're thinking in terms of PHP Storm. PHP Storm is, of course, created for PHP. In this case, Visual Studio Code is not created for PHP, so you have to always look for extensions to improve that, to implement the kind of analysis or comparison between two different routines. So I think that you're not going to find that because Xdebug can provide, for example, ways to compare code, but the editor is not going to have something special for that in particular, unless that someone creates that kind of functionality, advanced functionality.
Okay, thanks. And the other thing I was thinking is there's so many extensions here, which you don't have in PHP Storm. Do you find that they clash with each other? Is it that you should always try and reduce the number of extensions, or do they happily sit side by side?
They could crash if you, for example, if you install Intel Fence and IntelliSense, that they are similar extensions. I think that they could crash, but you're always trying to tweak which extension you install and which uninstall and how you can make light together. Because, for example, ESLint is one of the JavaScript extension that you always have to be very careful, because sometimes it does the same function that, for example, the Vue extension does. So yeah, sometimes you have to choose carefully for each project which extension do you want to use. For example, here in the settings, I have defined, for example, for each extension type, which formatted I want. For example, for JavaScript, I use the ESLint formatter. But in other cases, for example, I use, for example, for TypeScript, I use the native formatter that comes with Visual Studio Code. And that's kind of tricky because you have to customize for each language that you use the different formatters or the features that you want. So it is very flexible, but sometimes it can be chaotic in some ways because you have to really customize you can customize the editor for the language that you want to use and how to extend it. For example,
Thanks. One of the things that only experience really teaches you.
Yeah, for example, I sometimes I use Terraform. Yeah. So by default, it is disabled. But when I have to use Terraform, I enable this extension. And yeah, there are so many aspects of Visual Studio Code that we need to really understand how to use extension, and sometimes it can be complex. But for a student that they only want to use the PHP and start learning how to use it, I think that this is the best list to start step by step, and after that build complexity with time into the editor. We were talking about remote development. So, for example, when you open remote development, you have to choose first. I have already configured the remote explorer with one site, my blog. And this is my blog, so I'm going to access my blog here. I'm going to open in a new window. The folder is here. And so you can access here the site and try to change or configure anything. The site is live, so it doesn't have remote debugging, so we have to be careful because everything that we do here is going to impact in the site. And well, to configure this, for example, if I want to configure a new SH target, we need to add it here. I don't have another site to show, but the idea is that you create you create a new profile and you connect to a host. You can add a new host, but there is a way to open. I want to show you how to open the configuration files, because I think that the students have more. The problem can be configure the SSH access to remote access to here in the code. In the code, you can check the configuration and configure the access to the site. In this case, I configure the user to access my blog, the key to access remotely, and the port where it is running the site. And after that, you can choose here and configure a new connection to access the site. I think that was the question from students. No? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I actually went through it last night and very late last night managed to do the same. So that's it. And you just done it in minutes.
Yeah. What else? So, that's most the things that I have in my mind. So I don't know what else to say. Any question from the students? No.
Any questions from anyone? As there's not that many students, it's more older ones here.
Okay.
Anibal, I'm interested in looking at the web server version of VS Studio Code. Have you looked at that? Where you can set up your own server that allows you to access Visual Studio Code through your browser?
But the Visual Studio Code, it doesn't come with a native web server here. You can connect.
I don't think it's a native thing. I think it's a Docker install that allows you to set up a website that is essentially VS Studio Code, so you can access and develop your local code from remote.
Yeah, but you can access any web server. There is no restriction in the versions or the integration.
Now, what I think you mean is that you have a website where Visual Studio Code is running on that website, so you can run Visual Studio Code in the browser. That would be ideal for example, for a Chromebook or something.
Yes. Yes. Perfect.
No, I never explored that part.
I was just thinking about using it. I'll be going away for a couple of weeks and was thinking probably take some local stuff with me, but would also be very useful to get access to remote stuff, and wondered whether something like that or remote desktop would be better.
Yes, I know that Visual Studio has a lot of information about remote development. I most of the time I used it locally, so I have a lot of Dockers on my computer and move around, but I never change to access the same code from different locations. You can, and maybe this link from to know how to configure this part of the Visual Studio can help you to configure for your setup.
Okay.
Annabelle, code style. So if you've got one of the things with new students and some of the older ones, pointing at myself, is code style and making sure that we use the Joomla code style. What's the best way to enforce that with Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, you have an extension that implements PHP CS.
Would you mind showing us that, going through that?
Yes, this one. No, I don't want to install it here. Let me show you the. Let me show you. I'm going to enable it, but by default it is disabled. So this extension, most of the time, when you use an extension, you have to read how the author created the extension and how it requires the configuration. You can configure the code sniffer to be locally or globally, and you can configure where it is and how to execute it, and the standard that you're going to use. By default, it is configured with use PCR2. Yeah, this is the default setting, but you can configure to use another coding standard from your local installation. In my case, I use, for example, I use most of the time I use PCR2, but when I call for Joomla, I have the local installation of the Joomla coding standards. So when you change this, you can apply automatically. It automatically applies the standard and reports the issues that you could have with your code. In this case, for example, is the hello world. I'm going to enable. It is enabled. So, for example, this is something wrong. Yeah, of course. There is no problem here. I'm going to change the standard. I don't remember if I have the. Let me see. No, it is not here. Well, that's the idea. I have to download the latest version of the Joomla coding standard, but the idea is that it is not.
I think we're now entering the realms of a proper talk because something's not working.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been a problem unless if everything worked straight away.
Yeah, because I am just creating all of this on the fly, and sometimes I don't know what is the problem. Yeah, that's better. But there is something wrong. It applied the formatting, but PHP CS is complaining about something. PHP CS it is not installed in the project, but it is also not in the path. So that's the problem of this project. But that's the idea of how you can work with PHP CS. You have to install locally to make it work in the path, and also configure how to find the standards.
Thanks for that, because that's something I need to get set up. So that's really helpful.
Yeah. And also there's several other configurations they are interesting for configuring the IntelliSense or the PHP unit configuration. If you use PCR2, you can use PHP CS Fixer to automatically apply the fixes to the code. I think that you can also configure it for Joomla, but I never did that. That's mainly a quick overview of Visual Studio Code for Joomla.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other questions, comments? Be interesting to hear from other people who've used Visual Studio Code and perhaps have moved to and from PHP Storm. And I know in one case, Dreamweaver, try and stop laughing, just to hear the differences, because it took me a long time to get into PHP Storm. I've had a few goes with Visual Studio Code, didn't like it at first, but I'm starting to dislike PHP Storm more, and that's pushing me to look at Visual Studio Code more.
Yeah, for me, it never worked. PHP Storm never worked for me because it has a certain way to do the things, and you have to always try to use the preferences, the commands, and the way that you structure your project with PHP Storm, and this not very flexible. I think that the biggest benefit of Visual Studio Code is that it is so flexible that you can change anything. It's very versatile. On the other hand, there's also a big community. This is open source. An open source editor. So there's a big community of people contributing with the editor and people creating extensions. So sometimes it is kind of chaotic, but you know about that because we are a community, so we are used to that kind of community development. So this is the same sense of start to be creating something on the fly with the community.
And how easy is it to get into creating extensions in PHP Storm? Have you?
I have created an extension for Joomla. This is my extension. I'm not an expert. I know there are people that really know how to create an extension, a complex extension. My extension is only a collection of snippets that I used for Joomla, for example, to create an extension of retrieve the instance of the application to access the factory or the form token or some kind of general stuff. But there are people that created a very complex extension of services, and there are extensions that they are paid. For example, this one, this is paid. Some features are free, but other features are premium. So they have a license of $9, so it's not expensive. But they provide premium features, and you can use a lot of functionality. But my extension is only a collection of snippets, and I mainly clone it for another extension. So yeah, it's mainly JavaScript.
But that's actually really useful. I mean, that could be, that's something that could be extended. You'd have PHP and JavaScript. That's really useful. Snippets so much time.
Yeah. There are many extensions providing snippets or a lot of solutions. So there's the extension marketplace is a world apart where you can find anything, and the extensions are very popular sometimes. For example, we are talking, for example, the Python extension has 32 million downloads, so they are widely popular.
Yeah, I too made the switch from PHP Storm to VS Code because I'm also a long-time VS Code user, and I can work within PHP Storm, but the way that I can, do Joomla development in VS Code for me, it's just like Anibal says, it's just simpler, it's easier, it's really handy to set up debugging. I must say that I'm running PHP and Apache and Mysql locally, not in a Docker setup. So getting Xdebug working is really, really handy. And I use quite the same extensions that Anibal uses, and I use a few different ones. For example, for PHP code formatting, I use a different extension that also does code formatting according to the PSR2 standard. So, but I'm pretty happy with it. But what I also like about it is that it's very easy to also edit like CSS or HTML or JavaScript, that sort of thing. I know PHP Storm can do that too, but I'm just more used to working in VS Code, so I'm more productive there. That's my take on it.
I was actually while kind of asking Anibal and to do this talk and considering the whole Google Summer of Code students thing, I think one of the things I've found in the Joomla community is to get to any level, you've got to do an awful lot of tooling up, and that can put a lot of people off. You can't just dive in and start writing code. We can, but there is a lot of tooling, and there's so many different setups. Is it Mac? Is it Windows? Is it Linux? You know, and all the different things. So one of the thoughts I had, wonder in this community here that's online at the moment, what you think is, in GLIP we have lots of different channels, but one of the channels I thought we should build, or three, are environments. So maybe do a VS Code channel and a PHP Storm channel.
Yeah, please do.
And we put the things like this talk in the VS Code channel, and perhaps Rene, the talk that you're going to do on local development and XDebug on a local development, probably next Saturday. That sort of thing. If we put that in there, then I think new students, new contributors, you know, this is part of the onboarding of people, rather than having this, right, now go and do everything to Joomla standards and bye. You know, they can go in there, they can find simple people who are using it. So in the VS Code one, we probably split it into 3 groups: Linux, Windows, and then you can go and speak to somebody who's got your setup, and you know, spend an hour going through it with them. You're going to be so much quicker at getting tooled up than floundering around in documents.
What I particularly like about VS Code, I work with 2 colleagues, and these guys are both Windows users. I'm a Mac user, but like Anibal said, all the settings in VS Code are in a JSON file, and I moved my JSON file to the Windows setup of my colleagues, and they only needed to change the path of the local PHP executable, and they were up and running. They could do code formatting, they could do debugging. So that's what I particularly like about the ease of setting up VS Code. I've put my setup file also on GitHub, so that's very easy to share.
Yeah, for example, in one of my extensions, I used to use, for example, to pack the extension and to build the extension. I also have a combination of PHP and JavaScript. For example, this is the Webpack script that compiles and packages my extension to be built when it's built. So we are having, for example, a combination of Composer, JavaScript, and everything inside the Visual Studio Code. I think that this mix of languages and technologies that Visual Studio provides are allowing us to combine this kind of behaviors. We are not only using one single technology anymore, for example, PHP or Joomla. We are trying to combine everything, you know, to empower your way of creating extensions. That's kind of crazy, I think. And one question that I have is, have you been able to configure the stubs, the Joomla stubs, to help find the classes and where they are located? Is there a way to better configure, for example, the stubs here? You know, the file that you compile and generate from the CMS to locate the files. I think a PHP Storms has some way of generating the stubs, maybe?
I don't know.
Okay, that's something that I am trying to find, how PHP Storm configures the stubs to classes and factories, and because in Laravel they have a similar way of discovering where are the facades and that kind of stuff. And I think that Joomla has something like that, but I didn't find how to do it in Visual Studio Code yet. I have to research that part. That's
Put a link to one in GitHub and is asking this one.
about what? The stubs?
Yeah.
Okay. That's something to look into. That's it. That's what I have. I don't know if you have any other question. Are we still recording, or that's it?
Patrick, are we still recording?
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll go off and make a few. I'll put a Visual Studio Code channel into Glip, and then if anyone's interested in joining that, just ping me and I'll put people in. And I'm going to copy out all the stuff that we've got in the chat today and fill it with some of the links that have been talked about. And then hopefully we can get a little community together that will help with getting the whole onboarding process. And I'm really enjoying the idea that you both, Rene and Annabelle, said about sharing your setup so that someone that's new doesn't have to spend forever playing around. You can actually share the setup and then talk them through the setup, and it's going to be so quick to onboard. And then there could be a basic student setup in the future where these are all the things that you need. I think that'd be brilliant, really helpful.
Fine by me. Great idea. Yeah.
Well, if we could work on that, I'd be very happy to work on that with you, and get that kind of documented and actually go through it myself to try and see if I can understand it. I can, and I think anyone can. So that'd be good.
Anibal?
That would be great.
Anibal?
Yeah.
One of the things in PHP Storm, which is I find really useful, is this ability to set up a template for a new project.
Yes.
Now, when you were doing your rummaging around in your files earlier on, it was a bit difficult to see just how they're organized. Is it very easy to organize, for example, a configuration just for a new project, or is all of the configuration built into the configuration file, even project-based stuff? Does it even split it out like that?
There are some kind of templating. There are also workspace support for workspaces. Maybe I started using Visual Studio Code before the workspaces, so I am kind of used to another way of organizing my projects. But there is a concept of workspaces. I use another project manager, but with my projects. But I know that there are people working with workspaces, but I didn't try that functionality. There are so many things to learn in Visual Studio Code that I didn't explore that part.
Okay. And then one other thing you said at the beginning of your talk about it can be used for so many other things, and you mentioned about taking notes in markup and that
Yes.
kind of thing. What other things have you seen that it can do that you think might be quite useful?
For example, there's a to-do text mode to manage tasks here. I use this extension that you can define tasks in this way and make it work for you.
Uh-huh.
You can. This is a standard. I mean, a standard. Well, it's a way to document. It's like to manage a way to manage a to-do list with priorities, tasks, and the tasks are colored. So it's kind of nice extension to manage tasks. Yeah, Markdown is a big one. This one to manage the task is also a handy one. And I think that you can use the GitHub projects and tasks here because you know that now that Microsoft acquired GitHub, they have control over the editor and GitHub, so they are integrating both tools, and you have official official extensions to support pull requests and issues, so you don't need to go to the site to manage the tasks that you are assigned or the issues. For example, another important part of all of this is that Microsoft is building all of these extensions, many extensions. So they are investing heavily on this combination of the ecosystem of Visual Studio Code and GitHub.
Mm-hmm. It was a little bit of a worry though that Microsoft are in there for building up the community and then all of a sudden start hitting you up with charges and fees and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course. There's always, but right now all of this is open source, so we are always free to clone and duplicate all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's amazing just how fast it's grown as well. I know Visual Studio Code has been around for a long time, but not in this format.
Yeah, I am showing you the Visual Studio Code in English, but I can apply a translation to Spanish or other languages. That's
okay,
crazy.
great. Thanks very much, Anibal. That was great.
Yeah.
Two extensions that I also like is there is a pretty good MySQL client for Visual Studio Code, so you can access your MySQL databases inside VS Code, and there's also a pretty good FTP client for Visual Code, but I always use an external client because I only run secure FTP. And the fact that it has a really good terminal inside VS Code, which is also handy.
Yeah. And again, there are so many ways to use Visual Studio Code that I know it is impossible to measure how to apply it, because it is beyond creating a tool for developing. You can coordinate, for example, markdown writing between several authors for a site. Yeah, I think that this is the combination of an editor and an online tool to collaborate with another people. That's the key. Is combining both ideas of an editor, a text editor, and a tool to connect a community or authors or group or team in a company, an organization.
And it does seem very lightweight, I must admit. If I click to open Visual Studio Code, it's there instantly on my machine. And if I hit PHP Storm, I can come back when the tea is ready. On my laptop, it takes quite a while to open up. So there's definitely a big difference.
Does it do the same kind of project indexing on all the files so that it's easy to find text within entire directory structures and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
You can switch and replace in multiple files.
Yeah.
Just seems to do it in such a, like Phil says, in such a lightweight way. You don't even really notice.
Yeah. It's kind of natural.
Yeah. Wow.
See how fast that is.
Yeah.
I suppose it's all local search. Yeah, it's.
Well, they've also had a lot of experience, haven't they, with the Windows search that they've been kind of improving year on year on year. So maybe there's part of that engine in here.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm fighting Windows from shutting down on my machine because it's decided it wants to restart now. So there are some things they still haven't quite got right. But, so if I suddenly disappear and the whole session goes, it's because Windows decided to restart. Well, thanks for that. That's great. I mean, we're coming up for the hour. I think we've gone through. That's really useful, helpful, and we've got some documents from it. I'll go and build the little channels that people can meet in and say, ping me if you're interested. And, I'd like to flesh this out. So our our own Joomla docs are a much more enjoyable way of getting it tooled up in a quicker way, especially with the ability to share the setups. That'd be brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anibal. Great to
Thank
see you
you.
again.
I'll leave it open for a bit if anyone